The plate hit the floor so hard that the sound seemed to split the whole house in two. It was a simple white plate with a thin silver rim, the kind of plate you'd never notice in a cabinet full of nicer dishes. But to me, that plate had been a daily reminder that I did not belong. For 3 years, every dinner, every holiday, every family gathering, my mother-in-law had set my food on that one separate plate and slid it a little farther away from everyone else, like I was something fragile, or worse, something dirty. She never did it to my husband. She never did it to my brother-in-law, his wife, or the cousins who drifted in and out of the house like they owned the place. Only me. And that night, at the worst possible moment, my mother-in-law dropped it. The plate shattered across the kitchen tile in bright white pieces, and everybody froze. My mother-in-law, Diane, stared down at the broken pieces like they had personally betrayed her. Then her face changed. Not shocked, not sad, afraid. That was when I knew something was wrong. My name is Ellie Parker, and if you had met me 5 years ago, you would have called me lucky. I had a steady job at a dental office, a little apartment with a crooked balcony in Columbus, Ohio, and a boyfriend named Ryan who made me laugh so hard I once spilled iced coffee down the front of my own blouse because I couldn't stop smiling at one of his stupid jokes. He was a mechanic, the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands. And when he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. 3 months after our wedding, Ryan's father, Harold, got sick. That was the beginning of everything changing. Harold had always been the quiet one in the family. Diane ran the house, the conversations, the money, and every emotion that got to stay in the room. Harold just smiled politely and excused himself when things got tense. He had a way of looking at me, though, that made me feel seen. Once, when Diane was fussing over napkins and silverware and telling me I'd put the pie dish in the wrong place, Harold had caught my eye across the kitchen and given me a tiny, apologetic shrug. After he passed, Diane became colder. Not loud, not dramatic, just colder. The kind of cold that slipped under your skin and stayed there. Ryan was devastated. And because the house had been in Harold's name and the mortgage was already paid off, Diane said it made sense for us to move in with her temporarily while we saved for our own place. Ryan thought it was practical. I thought it was a mistake. But I loved my husband, and I loved the idea of family. And like a fool, I believed that if I was patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough, Diane would eventually accept me. I learned very quickly that acceptance was not what she had in mind. From the first dinner in that house, she made it obvious that I was the extra piece. She would ask Ryan how work was, how his car was running, whether he wanted seconds, whether he remembered to pay the electric bill. Then she would turn to me and ask things like, "And you're still doing that little office job?" Little office job. That was how she talked about everything in my life. My job, my clothes, my cooking, my voice, my opinions. When I offered to help wash dishes, she'd say, "Don't worry, Ellie. You've done enough for one day." When I bought groceries, she'd check the receipt like I'd tried to steal from her. When I made a casserole for Sunday dinner, she picked at it in front of everybody and said, "It's very sweet that you try." That one hurt more than I ever admitted. But the plate was the thing that truly humiliated me. Every single night, Diane would set the table for the family. And when it was my turn, she would place my food on a separate plate. Always a plain white plate. Never one of the matching set. Sometimes it had less food on it. Sometimes the serving was just a little colder by the time it reached me. But the message was always the same. You are not one of us. At first I thought maybe it was some bizarre habit she'd picked up after Harold died. Some grief thing that made her strange about serving. I tried to ignore it. Then one night I noticed that everyone else had been served from the turkey platter at the table, while my portion had been dished out in the kitchen and brought to me last. I waited until Ryan went to the garage and Diane was rinsing a pan. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked quietly. She didn't even look at me. "What would make you think that?" "The separate plate," I said. My voice trembled despite my best effort. "Every day. Why do you do that?" She dried her hands, turned, and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because I like things organized. That's not what this is." For the first time, she set the towel down and looked directly at me. "Ellie, you're very sensitive." That sentence became her favorite weapon. If I cried, I was sensitive. If I asked a question, I was sensitive. If I stood up for myself, I was sensitive. And because Ryan hated conflict, he kept telling me to let it go. "She's just set in her ways," he'd say, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how she is." No, I thought. I know how she treats me. But I kept quiet, because I was trying to keep peace in a house where peace was something Diane controlled like a thermostat. Then, 6 months after we moved in, Harold's estate got settled. That was when the real problem started. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Harold had left a few things to Diane, a few things to Ryan, and some money in a trust. Diane acted annoyed about the whole thing, as if the paperwork itself had personally inconvenienced her. But I noticed something strange. Every time Ryan asked about the trust, Diane changed the subject. Every time I asked where the money was going, she snapped at me for being nosy. I would have let it go if not for the fact that suddenly Diane started talking about the house, as if it belonged to her alone. "This home has been in the family for decades," she said at Thanksgiving while carving the ham. "It will stay in the family." That was odd, because Ryan had already told me his father had made him the beneficiary of the house after the mortgage was paid. The deed had been updated years earlier. Ryan was sure of it. Still, Diane had a way of saying things that made you question your own memory. She was the kind of woman who could insist the sky was green and make you wonder whether you'd seen it wrong. The separate plate got worse after that. Sometimes she would put a smaller portion on it than anyone else got. Sometimes she'd forget to bring it until everyone was almost done eating. Once she slid it to me and said, "I hope this is enough. I didn't want to waste any." Ryan laughed awkwardly, and his brother's wife, Megan, looked away. Nobody defended me. Nobody ever did. There were moments, tiny ones, when I wondered if I was losing my mind. I started taking pictures of the table in case I needed proof later. I wrote down dates in the Notes app on my phone after every dinner. I hated that I was doing it, but I hated even more how powerless I felt. Then came the night the plate broke. It was Diane's birthday, and the house was packed. Ryan's younger brother, Tyler, was there with his wife, Megan, plus 2 of Diane's sisters, an elderly uncle, and even a family friend who had known them since high school. The kitchen smelled like pot roast, garlic bread, and the sweet floral scent Diane always wore. The same perfume she'd been spraying on herself for years like a badge of authority. I had spent all afternoon helping. I made the salad, set the napkins, and baked Diane's favorite lemon bars even though she never thanked me for anything I made. When dinner was finally ready, everybody crowded around the long dining table while Diane barked little instructions like a general in pearls. "Tyler, take the end seat. Megan, don't forget the gravy. Ryan, you're blocking the light." I stood near the doorway, holding the platter of rolls, waiting to be told where to sit. It was humiliating, even after all that time, waiting for permission like I was hired help in my own marriage. Diane glanced at me and pointed toward the kitchen counter. "Ellie, your plate is over there." I looked where she pointed. One separate plate, just like always, placed by itself on the far end of the counter. Something in me broke then, though I didn't know it yet. "Why?" I asked. The room went quiet in a way that made my skin go cold. Diane sighed loudly, as if I had interrupted something important. "Because I don't need everyone crowding the table, and this makes it easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. Ryan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Ellie," but I was too tired, too humiliated, too done. "No, Ryan. I want to know why I'm the only one who gets a separate plate every day." Diane's face tightened. "You're being dramatic." "I'm asking a question." She set down her carving knife. "Well, perhaps if you spent less time looking for insults and more time being useful, you wouldn't feel so offended." Megan shifted in her seat. Tyler stared into his drink. The old uncle suddenly became very interested in the wall. I looked at Ryan. "Say something." He swallowed hard. "Mom, maybe just let her sit at the table." Diane blinked, almost shocked that her son had dared to speak. That was when her hand jerked. Whether she meant to set the plate down hard or whether she simply lost her grip, I'll never know. But the plate slipped off the counter and crashed to the floor in a spray of white pieces. For a second, nobody moved. Then Diane gasped. Not because the plate was broken, because something had fallen out of it. I saw it before anyone else did. A folded square of yellowed paper, so tightly tucked under the base of the plate that it had survived all those dinners hidden from view. It lay there among the shards like a secret finally refusing to stay buried. Diane lunged for it. So did I. I got there first. My fingers closed over the paper, and when I unfolded it, I saw handwriting I recognized immediately from the few Christmas cards Harold had ever signed for me. Harold's handwriting. My pulse began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I read the first line, and my stomach dropped. If this note is found, it means Diane never let you eat in peace. The room swayed. Ryan stood up so fast his chair screeched across the floor. Dad wrote that? I kept reading because I couldn't stop. The note was short, but every line landed like a blow. He had seen how Diane treated me. He had noticed the separate plate. He had been trying to find a way to help. He wrote that, if I ever found the note, I should go to a safety deposit box in downtown Columbus. He gave the bank name, the box number, and one final line that made my throat close. There is proof there of what she has been doing with the trust money. And Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I didn't stop her myself. The whole room was silent. Diane had gone pale in a way I'd never seen before. Ryan looked from the note to his mother and back again. What does this mean? It means nothing. Diane snapped too fast. Your father was confused at the end. He was sick. Really? I said, and even I was surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. Because this note looks pretty clear to me. Diane's eyes sharpened with panic, and that was when I knew the note wasn't the only thing she was afraid of. I turned to Ryan. Your father told me to check a safety deposit box. No, Diane said sharply. You are not going anywhere, the uncle muttered. Diane? But she ignored him. This family has been through enough. We are not turning a birthday dinner into a circus because my son's wife wants attention. It was the wrong thing to say to the wrong person at the wrong time. For years, I had swallowed her insults. I had endured her tone, her little corrections, her public humiliations. But there is a point when a person stops being wounded and starts becoming clear. I stared at her and said, You kept my plate separate because you wanted to keep me separate. But Harold noticed. He saw it, and he left me a note. Diane laughed, but it sounded thin and broken. Do you hear yourself? Yeah, I said. For the first time in years, I do. Ryan looked like the floor had disappeared under him. Mom, what trust money? Diane's mouth opened, then shut. That alone was enough. After everyone left that night, Ryan and I sat in the dark kitchen while the dishwasher hummed. The broken plate was still in the trash. The note was in my hand. Diane had gone to bed early, claiming she had a headache, but I knew she was in her room with the door locked. Ryan rubbed his face. I need to understand this. I know, I said. Did you know about any of this? No, but your dad wanted me to. He looked at me with such helplessness that I almost softened. Almost. I should have said something, he whispered. Yes, I said. You should have. That shut him down. The next morning, I went to the bank alone. The safety deposit box was real. Inside it was a small metal folder, a stack of documents, bank statements, and several handwritten notes from Harold. The documents showed that over the last 2 years of his life, Diane had transferred money out of the family trust into an account only she controlled. Not a little money. A lot. Enough to make my hands shake. There were also copies of utility bills, home repair invoices, and charitable donations that had never been made. The strangest part was that some of the charity payments had actually been cash withdrawals. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a long time after reading those papers. It wasn't just greed. It was theft. And Harold had been trying to stop it. One of his notes said he had begun hiding copies of important documents in places Diane would never think to look. He wrote that he suspected she had been isolating him from the rest of the family as well, controlling who saw him, what he signed, even what he ate near the end. He didn't write those words in anger. He wrote them like a man ashamed that he'd let things go too far. The last page was the worst. He had written a new plan for his will. It was not the original. It was a codicil, signed and notarized, that named Ryan as the primary beneficiary of the house and the remaining assets, but only if the property stayed available to both Ryan and me. There was a separate clause that stated if Diane was found to have deliberately mistreated or financially harmed any lawful beneficiary, the executor could remove her from control of the estate and transfer authority to an outside attorney. That attorney's name was listed at the bottom. I knew that name. It was my father's old friend, a local estate lawyer named Martin Hale, a man I'd met once at a church fundraiser years before. Harold had been planning this for a while. He had been planning it for me. I cried in my car for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I was sad, exactly. Because I was overwhelmed by the strange, aching tenderness of a man who had barely said much in life but had seen everything. When I got home, Diane was waiting in the kitchen. She looked calm. Too calm. The way people look when they've already decided to lie. "Where have you been?" she asked. I set the folder down on the table in front of her. She glanced at it and then at me. "What is this?" "Your late husband's papers." Her face didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "I know about the transfers," I said. "I know about the trust." Diane gave a tiny, cold laugh. "You think you know something because you found a few papers in a box. I think I know enough. Then you know nothing at all." That's when Ryan came in, and when he saw the folder, he immediately understood that the line had been crossed. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "Tell me the truth." Diane's eyes flashed. "The truth? The truth is that I kept this family together when your father was too weak to do what needed to be done. The truth is that I gave up years of my life for this house, this family, and that woman," she pointed at me, "has been poisoning you against me from day one." I took a breath. "You mean I should have just stayed quiet while you humiliated me?" "You are not the victim here." Ryan looked between us like he was seeing his life split into pieces. "Did you take the money?" Diane's jaw clenched. "Mum." And then she said the one thing she should never have said. "Yes, I used some of it. I deserved it." The silence after that was brutal. Ryan took a step back as if he'd been struck. "You deserved it? I took care of your father," she shouted suddenly. "I took care of this house. I took care of all of you while he sat there and let everything fall apart. Do you know what it is like to be invisible in your own marriage? To carry everyone and get nothing?" The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. Because all those years, she had made me invisible in my own marriage too. Ryan's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He just said, "Dad left a note." He knew. Diane's expression flickered with the first real fear I had ever seen from her. Ryan pointed at the table. "The one Ellie found." For the first time since I'd known her, Diane looked unsure. That was when I knew she had been counting on that note never being seen. The next few days were a storm. I called Martin Hale. Ryan called him too. Tyler got involved when he found out there was money missing. Megan, to her credit, stopped pretending this was some family misunderstanding and started asking pointed questions about the trust. The house, which had always been Diane's kingdom, suddenly became a crime scene of old paperwork and hidden lies. Martin came over in a gray suit with a leather briefcase and the expression of a man who had spent decades watching people betray one another over money. He spread the documents across the dining table. Diane sat at one end with perfect posture, pretending not to be afraid. Ryan sat beside me. Tyler stood by the window. Then Martin adjusted his glasses and said, "Mrs. Whitaker, these transfers appear unauthorized." "They were for family expenses," Diane said. "Then there should be records." "There are." "Then produce them." She didn't. Martin looked at the handwriting, the signatures, the dates, and then at the notarized codicil. Mr. Whitaker revised his estate plan 18 months before his passing. He named Ellie Parker as a protected beneficiary in the event of financial misconduct. He also left instructions that the residence remain available to both her and Ryan. Diane's head snapped up. "That is absurd." Martin's voice remained calm. "It is legal." She turned to Ryan. "Your father let a stranger matter more than his own wife?" I nearly flinched at the word wife. Ryan finally stood. "You're the one who made him hide things." Diane's face hardened. "I did what I had to do." "No," Ryan said, his voice shaking now. "You did what you wanted to do." That night, for the first time, he slept in the guest room instead of next to me. Not because he was choosing his mother over me, because he was ashamed. And shame can be louder than anger. The police weren't involved immediately, but the financial investigation began. Martin filed the paperwork to freeze the questionable trust account. He requested bank records. He contacted the accountant. He brought in a forensic auditor, a quiet woman named Denise who could make a grown person cry just by looking at a spreadsheet. As more documents came in, the truth got uglier. Diane had been making withdrawals in the months leading up to Harold's death, then continuing after his passing. She'd used some of the money to pay personal debts, some to remodel a sunroom she'd always wanted, and some to buy expensive jewelry she wore to church as if Grace itself lived in diamonds. But there was one more thing. She had also been diverting money from the account intended for Ryan and me to help with a family property tax shortfall that never existed. The tax notice she'd shown us had been fake. When I learned that, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed feeling something in me go very still. Not broken. Still, like water freezing over. I thought about all the dinners where I sat with that separate plate in front of me, letting myself believe I was just being sensitive. I thought about every time I'd apologized for things I didn't do. I thought about how often women are taught to minimize their own pain just to keep other people comfortable. And I realized Diane hadn't just been stealing money. She had been training the whole family to accept her version of reality. That was the real cruelty, not the plate. The plate was only the symbol. The real damage was the message underneath it. You do not matter. I stopped saying yes to everything. I stopped helping Diane cook. I stopped cleaning up after her like I was hired. When she ordered me around, I said, no. It was a tiny word, but to her it sounded like a gunshot. One afternoon she cornered me in the laundry room and hissed, "You think you've won?" I folded a towel carefully and said, "I don't think about winning. I think about the truth." She stepped closer. "Your little note won't save you." "My little note," I repeated. "From your husband? The one who saw through you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You should be careful," she said quietly. I looked up at her. "Is that a threat?" She didn't answer, but I saw something in her eyes then. Something I hadn't seen before. Panic had given way to desperation, and desperation makes people dangerous. I started locking my bedroom door. 2 days later, Tyler came to see me after work. He stood on the porch with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets and looked miserable. "I owe you an apology," he said. I leaned against the doorframe. "For what, exactly?" "For not saying anything sooner. For letting Mom treat you like that. For acting like it wasn't my problem." I studied him. Tyler had always been the easy one, the one who smiled and disappeared when things got hard. But now, he looked like a man who had finally realized his silence had become part of the damage. "What made you change your mind?" I asked. He looked down. "She tried to get me to sign something. That got my attention." He explained that Diane had called him into the kitchen and pushed a stack of papers at him, claiming they were insurance forms related to the house. She wanted him to sign as a witness. Tyler said he nearly did it until Megan asked what they were for. Then he looked closer and realized one of the pages was a transfer authorization for a small parcel of land Harold had owned with his brother years ago, a piece of inherited property that should have gone to all 3 sons equally. "She tried to take that too?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "And when I told her no, she lost it." That was when the last piece of the family's blind loyalty cracked. Tyler gave Martin a copy of the papers. Megan sent screenshots of text messages Diane had sent her asking if she really wanted to make this a legal family matter. Ryan finally went into the office drawer where Diane kept old records and found 2 more folders, hidden behind recipe cards and receipts. One folder was full of bills that had already been paid. The other contained letters Harold had written but never mailed. In one of them, he wrote, "I'm worried Ellie will think no one in this house cares if I don't say it now. So I will say it plainly. She is a good woman. She has been treated unfairly. If I fail to protect her, I hope this letter makes it right." Ryan read that letter with tears sliding silently down his face. The next morning, he apologized to me in the kitchen. Not in the dramatic, movie-style way people think apologies are supposed to happen. There was no shouting, no grand speech, no falling to the floor. Just a tired man, standing by the sink, looking older than he had a week before. "I should have protected you," he said. "I knew she was cruel, and I kept making excuses." I nodded. Yes, you did. He swallowed hard. Do you hate me? The honest answer was complicated. No, I said after a long moment. But I don't trust the version of you that looked away. That hurt him, and I was glad. Sometimes pain is the only thing that gets a person to finally grow up. We spent the next month living like strangers under the same roof while the legal process moved forward. Diane made herself into a martyr. She told anyone who would listen that I had manipulated her grieving family. She told church friends that Harold had been confused, that the note was probably a joke, that the trust papers were being misread. But lies have a shelf life. When the bank records came in, her story collapsed. The transfers were there. The fake receipts were there. The altered documents were there. The forensic audit found nearly $80,000 unaccounted for. And then came the final blow. Harold had also recorded a video message on an old tablet he'd hidden in the back of his closet. It was dated just 2 weeks before he passed. In it, he sat in his recliner with a blanket over his legs and looked directly into the camera. He said Diane was not to be trusted with the finances. He said he had seen her isolate Ellie repeatedly. He said the family should not let grief become permission for cruelty. And then, very quietly, he said, "If this reaches you, Ellie, I am sorry. I should have spoken sooner. Don't let her make you believe you imagined any of it." I remember sitting in the lawyer's office watching that video and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Because finally, someone had named it. Finally, the room had stopped pretending. Diane's expression when she heard about the video was unforgettable. It wasn't rage. It was the dead look of someone who has just realized every exit has closed. A formal legal notice followed. Then a court hearing. Then a settlement conference that ended with Diane losing control over the trust and being ordered to repay what she had taken. Because she had moved money around, used joint assets improperly, and falsified records. She was also removed from authority over the house's finances. The house itself stayed with Ryan, exactly as Harold had intended. The savings account tied to the trust was restored under court supervision. Tyler and Megan moved out first, claiming they needed a fresh start. Honestly, I think they just couldn't stand the tension anymore. I didn't blame them. Diane stayed. For a while. But the woman who had once strutted around that house like a queen now moved through it like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. No one asked her what she wanted for dinner. No one waited for her approval. The house was quiet. And for the first time in years, her power had limits. She hated that most of all. One evening, about a week after the settlement, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when she walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just reduced. "You're pleased with yourself," she said. I didn't turn around. "No, you took everything from me." I set a glass in the drying rack and faced her. "You did that to yourself." Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears if I believed she had any left for anyone but herself. "I loved that house." "No," I said softly. "You loved controlling it." Her mouth trembled, and for a second I thought she might say something human, something honest. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and said, "You will regret this." That old thread again. Always the same. I smiled, but not kindly. "Diane, I spent 3 years eating off a separate plate while you tried to make me feel small. If there's regret in this house, it belongs to you." She stared at me. Then she did something I never expected. She looked away first. A month later, Ryan's cousin called to say Diane had moved into a smaller apartment near Dayton after agreeing to a repayment plan. Her church friends, the same women who had applauded her stories for years, had stopped inviting her to events once the financial mess became public. Her reputation, which had once been the armor she wore like silk, was now full of cracks. That was karma, plain and simple. Not a dramatic crash, not fireworks, just the slow, honest collapse of a lie that had been fed for too long. And me? I got my life back. Ryan and I went to counseling, because marriages do not heal just because the truth comes out. They heal through the ugly work afterward, the awkward apologies, the hard conversations, the moments where someone has to choose whether they really want to become better. There were days I almost left. There were days I looked at Ryan and saw every moment he failed me. But there were also days when he showed up in ways I hadn't expected. He started setting the table himself. He asked how I was without expecting the answer to be easy. He stopped making excuses for his mother and started naming what she had done. He apologized to my face, to my family, to his brother, to the lawyer, and even to himself. One evening, months later, he brought home a new set of plates. Not fancy ones, just simple cream-colored dinner plates with a thin blue edge. He set them on the kitchen table and said, "I thought we should replace the old ones." I looked at the plates and laughed, because I couldn't help it. Then I cried, because I could. He smiled nervously. "Is that a bad idea?" "No," I said, wiping my face. "It's just funny." He frowned. "Why?" I touched the rim of one plate lightly. Because for years, one plate told me exactly where I stood in this family. Ryan's face tightened with guilt. I put my hand over his. "These are just plates. That's all they are. That's the difference." He nodded, and for once, he understood. A few weeks later, we invited Tyler and Megan over for dinner. Not Diane. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Tyler brought dessert. Megan brought wine. And for the first time in years, the table felt like a place people sat together instead of a place they performed loyalty. No one kept my plate separate. No one made a show of serving me last. No one watched to see whether I would complain. That night, when everyone was laughing over pie, Megan turned to me and said quietly, "I'm sorry no one protected you sooner." I smiled sadly. Me too. But I meant it in the past tense, because by then, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to hand me permission to exist. The real, final confrontation came about 2 months later, after the legal dust had settled, and Diane called Ryan asking to see him. He asked me if I wanted to come, and I said yes. Not because I needed to witness her downfall, but because I wanted to witness my own peace. We met her at a coffee shop on the edge of town. She looked dressed up, almost like she wanted to pretend this was an ordinary visit. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were tired. She stood when we came in. "Ryan," she said, then looked at me. "Ellie, Visat?" No one spoke for a moment. Then Diane folded her hands and said, "I'm not here to fight." I almost smiled at that. It was the first honest thing she'd said in months. "Then why are you here?" Ryan asked. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because I wanted to say, I made mistakes." Ryan didn't move. Her jaw tightened as if the words themselves cost her something. "I was angry after your father died. I felt left behind. I felt like everything was slipping out of my control, and I took it out on the wrong people." That wasn't an apology. Not really. It was too carefully built, too polished. But it was close enough to sound like she'd finally met a wall she couldn't talk her way around. She looked at me. "I treated you badly." "Yes," I said. Her breath caught, perhaps because she expected forgiveness to arrive just because she had named the wound. "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry." The room went quiet. Ryan's hands were clenched around his cup. "You didn't just treat her badly. You lied. You stole from Dad. You tried to take the house." Diane looked wounded, but not surprised. "It's all been settled," she murmured. "By law," Ryan said. "Not by conscience." That landed. Her eyes flashed, and I could see the old impulse to fight back, to twist the truth, to make herself into the injured one again. But something in her must have finally understood that no one at that table was buying it anymore. She looked down at her coffee. "I know I can't fix it." "No," I said. "You can't." She nodded once, as if accepting the shape of that truth. Then she reached into her purse and placed a small envelope on the table. "It's for you," she said to me. I didn't touch it right away. "What is it?" "A check," she said. "Part of what I owe you." I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because after everything, money felt almost insulting. "You think this makes up for years of humiliation?" "No." "Then why bring it?" Her face changed, and for one moment I saw the hollow place behind all her pride. "Because it's the only thing I can give back without lying." That was the closest thing to redemption I ever got from Diane. Not enough to erase what she had done. Not enough to repair the damage. But enough to prove she had finally stepped into the truth, even if only briefly. I took the envelope and put it in my bag. Ryan stood first. "We should go." Diane looked up at him. "Will you ever forgive me?" He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, I don't know, but I'll stop pretending what you did was okay. And that was the real end of her power over him. On the way home, the silence in the car felt different. Not heavy, clear. Finally, Ryan said, I keep thinking about Dad. Me too, I answered. He knew. Yes. Ryan looked straight ahead. He tried to warn us. He did warn us, I said. He just had to do it from beyond the grave because nobody listened when he was alive. That made him smile sadly. When we got home, I went into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where the new plates were stacked. For a second, I thought about the old white plate, the one that had carried so much humiliation, and I realized something surprising. I didn't feel anger toward it anymore. It had been broken, and with it, the lie had broken too. Maybe that is what some objects do. They hold a family's truth until they cannot hold it anymore. A few weeks later, I donated the remains of the old plate set to a local thrift shop. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to make room for better memories. Ryan came with me. At the counter, the woman thanked us and placed the box on a rolling cart. I watched it disappear into the back room, and instead of sadness, I felt light. Not because what happened hadn't hurt, because it had, deeply. But because pain is not the same as ownership. Diane had tried to own my place in that family by making me small. She had used silence, humiliation, and money to build a version of life where she stayed on top and everyone else stayed afraid. But she lost. Not in a movie way. In a real way. She lost trust. She lost control. She lost the respect of the people who finally saw her clearly. And I gained something better than revenge. I gained my voice. I gained the truth. I gained the ability to look at a dinner table without feeling like an intruder in my own marriage. If you asked me today whether I hate my mother-in-law, I would tell you no. Hate would mean she still has too much of me. I don't hate her. I pity the woman who had everything she needed and still chose greed over grace, control over love, and lies over family. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Ryan is asleep beside me, I think about Harold's note. If this note is found, it means Diane never let you eat in peace. He was right. She never did. But the beautiful part is that she couldn't stop the truth forever. In the end, the plate broke. And when it did, it didn't just shatter porcelain. It shattered the illusion that I was disposable. It shattered the family's silence. It shattered Diane's grip on everyone around her. And it built something new in its place. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, just honesty. And sometimes, honestly, that feels like the biggest justice of all.